And I'm just preparing while going live on Zoom to YouTube. And there we go. We have
And I'm
liftoff.
just preparing.
There we go. We have gone live. And there we are. We're back. And I'm assuming Colin's on his, well, there's Brent. We can officially start.
Okay, we can start. Brent
Yeah.
is here.
Yep, Brent is here, so that's it. We can officially start.
Welcome, Brent.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
I'm glad
Thank
to
you.
hear it.
How are you?
Reasonably well. Can't complain.
Yeah, wonderful.
I could
Mm.
complain.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
but
you
you
probably
won't.
could, but you won't.
Anyway,
Geez, everybody can complain.
yes, we all have that power and that choice.
So, yep.
Okay. So are you ready for us to begin, Blair?
Yes, I believe I am. I don't recall seeing anything from Colin about him. I'm just checking my WhatsApp messages.
Well, doesn't Collins AI mean something, or is that something that he lends to use for everybody else?
Now Colin's AI shows up because he's accepted the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Okay. There we go. Okay. We'll see. We should be able to go anyway.
Okay. So are we ready to begin?
We are.
All right, take it away, Tim.
Okay. Well, before we get started, first of all, welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody that the BDE next week and the following week falls on Christmas Eve and also falls on New Year's Eve. So we're actually going to be taking the next 2 weeks off, and we look forward to seeing everybody back here our first Tuesday in January, which is January 7th of 2025. So just wanted to throw that out to everybody really fast that we are going to be taking the next couple weeks off. So hopefully everybody enjoys their Christmas and New Year's. So we won't be here with the Blair Dunkley Experience. And with that, welcome everybody to the 325th episode of the Blair Dunkley Experience, where we discuss mind models. Mind models are a collection of extensively tested thought frameworks, skills, and behaviors that enable people to transform their lives intentionally. They have been tested and proven to be 80% effective when applied consistently, versus mindset, which is only 1% effective. Your host for this evening is Blair Dunkley, the creator of mind models. The Blair Dunkley Experience is Blair's free gift to you, and it's an opportunity to learn, experience, and practice mind models in a safe, real-world environment. We are Tim and Becky Graff, your co-hosts and certified mind model coaches, along with the amazing Patty McClurg, as always, and Colin Jewett, who will be with us hopefully here shortly, who is a coach in training. My models have helped Becky and I personally in every area of our lives, not only in business, but personally, resolving an 8-year issue in our marriage within a couple of hours, and also in navigating grief and PTSD from a tragic accident that happened to us in 2020, where we lost both of our young daughters. My models have allowed us to be more effective and increase our capacities and speed of recovery without traditional counseling. We look forward to learning together, and tonight we welcome you to the Blair Dunkley Experience. If you're on YouTube, please comment, like, and subscribe. And just a reminder that we are here every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Eastern. except for, as I mentioned, the next 2 weeks we will be taking off for Christmas and New Year's. And if you haven't had a chance to hear about, Blair also has a study guide that he introduced a few episodes ago. I believe it was back on episode 317. This is an opportunity for you to get all the notes from 317 moving forward, and all of the future Blair Dunkley experiences. You'll be able to get all the study notes, the guides, and it basically is an in-depth look at what we're talking about here on the Blair Dunkley experience. And you can get all those historical back to 317 and moving forward for $25 a month or $300 a year. And it's an opportunity to dive deep into the notes and everything that we're talking about here. And it's a lot of help to be able to see the mind models and how they break down. So if you haven't had an opportunity to grab those, I highly recommend you grab those. And my wife just threw the link up in the notes here, so in the chat. And with that, welcome everyone.
All right. Okay, guys, we've been working on this series, Guiding Principles of Effective Communication, and this is actually our 9th and final episode before we move on to new material in the new year. So what we've been talking about, guiding principles for effective communication. So tonight we're going to be talking about what not to do. And so I'm curious, in communication scenarios, what is it that you find about your communication, either with yourself or with others, that doesn't necessarily work that awesomely? And I'm curious who would like to share, and I will call on somebody if we have silence. Anybody care to share? No one?
Well, I'm sort of very tempted to.
Well,
Colin just arrived.
say that
Sorry.
again, Blair.
I have some personal experience with this that I deal with.
And say,
from
so
time-
do I. So you go ahead and share, and we'll go from there if you don't mind.
Welcome, Colin. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, sorry I'm late.
No worries, no worries. Anyway, yeah, I was doing a couple of things. I was working with a client today, and one of the things that he was doing was buying into a belief. He's a very smart man who is buying into a habit pattern and a belief that he's stuck. Okay. And that he's been stuck for a long time, like years. And the whole thing here is that there's so much judgment going on based on how he used to be, and there's no updating. So he doesn't take a look at what's doing effectively. And, the judgment of that self-judgment of how he's viewing himself, in spite of the fact that he's way up there in the company, he's in the C-suite of a company. And yet he has sort of a bit of an imposter syndrome, but he reinforces the imposter syndrome with the belief that holds it there, and he doesn't figure out and chunk things down to identify what he's actually doing to move things forward. So it's never fast enough, it's never enough, it's never enough. And so he's constantly putting pressure on himself and pressure on people around him. And so he's constantly noticing that his changes are not actually changing, or what he perceives aren't changing. But today, getting him to chunk it down was really a bit of an eye-opener for him. And yeah, it's one of those things that we will be going through, well, we already sort of have gone through before with the BDE here. And taking a look at what we've accomplished and what is happening. Do we actually evaluate ourselves fairly? Also, the flip side of that is, do we evaluate others fairly when we're misevaluating ourselves.
And I love that, Blair, because in communications, like relationships with yourself and other people, I think that's a very key thing is we sometimes make snap judgments or assumptions about things and lend our credence to the story, the judgments in our own head, and fill in the gaps of what we perceive from the other person's point of view or what we expect out of the other people without taking an opportunity to check in with what's actually going on, what's real in that moment.
Yeah.
In our intro, we talk about Tim and I resolving an 8-year issue in our marriage with mind models. It directly correlates to being able to communicate effectively and
Yeah.
kind of taking a look at the things that we were not doing effectively. What we were doing was judging the other person's behavior and expecting the other person to understand and read our minds
She
about,
should just know what I'm thinking.
and he should just know what I'm thinking. That's reasonable, yes. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but your spouse ought to have a crystal ball and be able to understand exactly what you mean when you're thinking it. However, what happens if we don't actually communicate? So I'm curious from somebody else, what have you noticed for yourself doesn't work often, or you find that doesn't work well when you're trying to communicate with another person? Jeremy, do you have something that you would care to share? Anything coming up for you?
Hmm. Well, I think I'm thinking of being on the defensive. It's something of a natural behavioral pattern for a lot of people, in the sense that they either already feel guilty or responsible for something, and they go into a reaction mode in their amygdala, and some people say they're hijacked, and so they don't actually make space for listening to what the other person is actually saying, and they're automatically putting that other person on their heels and essentially potentially putting them on the defense as well.
A great point. And so when that's happening, that's one of those things that we filter through. It's that judgment side of things. They're not evaluating things. They're just reactive from their perspective and their felt sense in that moment. So thank you, Jeremy, for sharing that because I think it's very applicable. What about you, Brent? Have you noticed anything for you that doesn't work in communication with either yourself or others?
Yeah, there are times in a little more telling, like in communicating instead of asking people what they're feeling, or like in uh, situations that like their behaviors or what they're doing, trying to figure out. It says jumping in and telling them what to do instead of asking them where they're at and how they're feeling so they can figure it out. It's just, sometimes feel rushed and you're like, I just, shortcut it, just tell them exactly what to do.
Mhm.
It, it, I don't do it as often as I used to, but I still do it sometimes. Usually depending on the situation, but it is more ineffective. It's not as effective as asking and taking the time for the other person to figure it out. Which then you usually don't run into that problem later, because they figure it out or they can see it and learn from there. So that, and there's times, and in those situations, sometimes I get a little bit of more judgment too myself in the telling. I can feel that piece there as well. So
Mhm.
not looking at the behavior, but as like the person. So afterwards, I'm like, man, that didn't work. And I'm judging the person, not actually like the behavior. So
Mhm.
yeah. So I usually go back and then, address it again if it was depending on what it was. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank
could I throw something in here for a minute? I'm noticing with both what Brent shared and what Jeremy shared that they are noticing ineffective communication by the response that it brings. So when someone is responding in a defensive manner, you can pretty well be sure that what they're receiving from you is judgment, whether that's your intention or not, likely not,
Mhm.
but it's what they're receiving. So we can notice our own ineffective communication patterns by the responses that we're getting from the other person we're communicating with.
Mhm.
Love
Mhm.
that.
Oh, I've got one that I've run into a few times too is aggressive, like aggressive response. So they're very defensive but get aggressive, and then I tend to get aggressive as well. Like it's very like not so maybe not defensive, but I get like aggressive back instead of like reading it like, okay, what did I, what was going on, and which direction to shift. It's my response right there is just to meet that aggression with aggression.
Mhm.
So I notice that's very ineffective as well.
Yeah. And one thing to like add on to that, thank you so much, Brent, for sharing is I know for me, especially when I worked more in like the corporate world, I'd have experiences with people where I would receive communication and I had to be very intentional about, keeping my stuff together, making sure that I'm making the other person happy, especially in like customer service situations. And yet on the flip side, when I was done, I was like, oh my gosh, no, 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 right? They can't have done this. I had all these stories in my head about what was causing them to behave or to do the thing that we were doing. And so this brings another, thing to bring into this conversation. I'm curious how many of you have ever experienced an experience similar where you've had an interaction with somebody kind of rubbed you the wrong way. And you're kind of like doing the bobblehead, yeah, uh-huh. You're just kind of trying to move things along, but then after the fact, you need to let it off. Like you got to let it out of your system. And so you find somebody to talk to about this situation or others. Has anybody else ever done that, or is that just me? Am I alone on an island? Okay. So when we're talking about ineffective communication,
Can I,
be
can I ask a quick question before we
yes,
move on? Is
yeah,
that need to feel understood?
maybe depends on context, I would say. So when you
Okay,
say
well,
it's
but
being
sometimes
understood,
when we're letting off steam
mhm,
because somebody's putting a, whether it's good or bad or whatever,
mhm.
sometimes we just want to be understood so we can say, okay, I'm justified.
Okay, so great, great point, Jane. And actually, this goes into what I was going to bring up is if you have one of those interactions, okay, and then you feel the need to let off steam and you're feeling the need to be understood, how effective is it to talk to other people versus the person who you had the interaction with? So another way to ask that is, how effective is it to talk about somebody who's not present in the situation in the moment?
I think of it in terms of two parts. It might be effective in letting off the emotional part if you haven't got there yet.
Mhm.
But as far as resolving the situation, it is ineffective if they're not present. And that's
And
why I think it's one of those skills, that we try to learn and teach, our kids is when they are doing exactly that, whether it's whining about somebody or gushing about somebody. If you don't express or take it up with the person that's also involved, it will never be resolved.
Mhm.
that is so huge too, because effective communication is a back and forth. And so if you're removing a party from that, a very specific person, you're just talking about the situation. Where are you at, actually? Where are you living in that moment, if that's what you're doing?
Internal.
Uh-huh. And do you have any way of creating a process forward at that moment?
Depends on whether you want to stay there or not.
Fair point, okay. But with the other person,
It-
if they're not part of it, makes it really challenging, doesn't it?
yes, it does.
Okay.
Well,
So
it makes it impossible, not just challenging. Okay. I don't know how to manage that one as challenging when it's not possible. Unless they have mental telepathy and they can psychically tell that you're pissed off at them.
well, that
But
goes back to that superpower that everybody should have, right?
that's right. Well, and
Yeah,
unfortunately,
right.
some people actually think you should be able to read their mind. So, can't you read my mind? Don't you know I'm pissed off at you? So, that's where a lot of that comes from. But I
Because
do
the
want to
body
support.
the body language is usually enough to give you some, because that's also a form of communication. So when somebody, you expect someone to read your mind and they haven't, and your body language is giving them something they may not understand, but you're still communicating. So how effective is just having the body language without the specificity of communication or a question? Did you really, is it really your intent to, hack me off or whatever? I mean, is this really what you want?
That
Because
face,
you're
Jane.
succeeding. It's like, yay.
Jane, did something come up for you? You made a
Yeah, I
face.
was gonna say, it depends on whether you just want to be telling them and going into you're gonna prove your position and that's all there is to it, versus an actual back and forth tete to tete. Let's make this effective for both of us.
Mhm.
Jeremy.
Yep.
To the thing that you just said, Jane, isn't that telling them and isn't that like one of the concepts we covered like 2 or 3 weeks ago? Like I said it's got three in it. It's P's something.
The
Oh.
three
The 3 Ps: prove, position, and process.
Isn't that
Yeah.
what you just described?
Absolutely. Where are you at?
Mhm.
And ask versus tell. Are you just gonna tell them? Or are you gonna actually ask and have them be part of it? Where's that, self-other situation? Are you going to turn it into a situation and just take them out of the whole equation of self-other situation? Or and
Well,
and,
now
and I
you're
bring
talking
that
about
up because
self-other.
this
I don't
was
know that.
so well, okay. Which one do you not know, Jeremy?
So, do you want to throw the diagram up there?
Which one?
The self-other situation. It is a mind model,
Okay.
and the diagram might help you, Jeremy, to understand this one.
Yeah, because I was just proud of myself because I was hearing the 3 Ps. We've gone
Oh,
like
my
No,
down,
you're
Yeah,
very
that's
we've
proud of
gone
brilliant.
yourself.
down the
Well
road.
done. Yes, well done, you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well done.
two thumbs up, Jeremy. Oh, yeah. Well, Colin gives you a whole lot of.
Lots
Yeah.
of thumbs.
So
Where am I
Jane's
going?
going to put something on the screen is what we're saying. Okay.
You have the
Okay.
self-other situation diagram?
I do. It's going to be in the
It's like
chat.
a Venn. It's like the true Venn. Oh, there it is
There
in
you-
the chat. Okay, got it.
Okay. So within this, she's got labeled the area. See if I can get it up
That
here.
spot. Yeah,
Yeah, you can't
Yeah,
control
area of
people.
control and area of influence.
right.
And then the sweet spot. And those circles can move. They're not always equally balanced.
Right.
By the
So,
way, you double click on the diagram, it should blow up to a larger size.
What
Yeah, I
part?
saved it locally.
Okay, good.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with this self situation and other, that's really when we're having conversations with people, what we were just talking about, if if people aren't present or how we're communicating with body language, it's how much are we moving ourselves into the realm of others or situations, or how are we removing ourselves from the situation. As Patty just mentioned, they can be fluid. But really when we're communicating, another part of this is, are we dealing with what's real, or are we dealing with story? Like Blair's example earlier, the gentleman that he was working with was exasperated, like building his own story. He wasn't necessarily operating and communicating to himself in the realm of what was actually real. And it's a very common thing when you expect somebody else to read your mind, because you have this story and this narrative. And I'm going back to that because we're married and we've had a lot of practice with this. With being able to communicate effectively, because when you're emotionally loaded, okay, and you've got this narrative in your head, we want to start to maybe identify, how can you shift out of that? Is this something where you're just dealing in the content of the story, and we're going to go there? Or are you working with the information and evaluating it in a way where you can create a process forward? To Jane's point, like, you can just tell somebody, if you have no intention to create a process and you just want, that's just what you want to do to prove, to your point, Jeremy, prove or position instead of work on a process, that is definitely your prerogative.
But
But
that's
is
being right, isn't it? That's like being addicted to being right.
Yes.
you're attempting
That
to
doesn't
position?
solve any problem. It doesn't serve any purpose. It's just perpetuating the ism of your personality.
Mhm.
Yes, but what does it in perpetuating the ism of your personality, what does that give you?
Ego satisfaction
Correct.
and distance from people because they don't want to be near you because you're really not allowing them to come in.
Do you intentionally, do most people
No,
intentionally want that distance?
no, but they don't know they're doing it.
Right. And that's the critical thing. That's one of the reasons that self-other situation is listening 3 levels deeper. Or actually it's situation, people, and process
Situation.
is listening, is actually the one for listening 3 levels deeper. Sorry, I
Is
screwed
that
up.
another Venn diagram or is that
It is,
something?
but
Okay.
it's actually, but this one is situation. Most people talk about situations first.
I feel like we should have, I don't know if anybody has, and I'm sorry, I don't want to take us too far off, but if anybody's ever been to Toastmasters, there are roles and people in the group that take responsibility for the entirety of the meeting to be the person that does X, Y, and Z. There's someone who keeps time, and there's someone that's called an ah counter. So anytime that people use vocalized insecurities like like that kind of stuff, like they'll literally keep a tab on that. And at the end of the meeting, they'll tell everyone in the meeting who spoke how many times they used that, vocalized insecurity. So I feel like we should have someone who's like picking up on each one of the models that has been discussed throughout the course of the meeting, because then we could say, oh yeah, this one was covered and like it's like labeling the labeling, I guess, I don't know.
The mind model ticker.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The mind
That's
model
a great
ticker.
idea. Never thought about that at all.
Yeah, that's actually kind of fun. Tim,
Yeah.
I wonder, would you comment a little bit from your experience, the kinds of things that Becky's talking about with story, how much do those relate to content and getting stuck in that content place?
Well, and to that, I love that Brent brought this up earlier. A lot of times we go into that ask and or telling instead of asking, and that gets into that content piece. And as human beings, it's easier for us to we tend to take that easy route, right? We have this idea in our minds, we have the content in there, and we just want to get it out, and so we tend to lean more towards that telling place. And we come to a conversation because it's so much easier just to tell somebody from our point of view, which is all judgment, what we think it is, and instead of actually going down into asking questions, because that takes a lot more effort as humans to ask a question that then feeds, Becky was talking about the process versus the content. To get into process, it's a questioning. It is asking a question that then, has a response from the other. And then you can ask another question and you have this back and forth process dialogue. If we just go into it with the content and this idea in our minds and we're just telling, that leads to that assumptions and those judgments and all those things as that story is coming out. And as was mentioned earlier, this is what Becky and I were doing that caused that 8-year issue for us.
We wouldn't do
Is
that.
we were both coming at it from just, this is what our perception, the content of what we thought it was, and just putting that upon the other instead of asking, okay, what do you see? And having that back and forth process dialogue. And so that came up for me is when Brent brought up, just telling people that the struggle with just coming right out the gate and telling instead of asking questions and being in a process flow is it tends to lead into that story, and then we go into the judgments and the assumptions, and that can lead down a rabbit hole that then you're trying to, so to speak, dig out of. And so that really gets into more of the content instead of the process when we're telling.
Well, and there's one of those pieces too, like how many of you guys like unsolicited advice?
Yep.
Jeremy's laughing. Does that mean you love it?
I'm very particular about the fact that I don't give advice.
Ah. So you're particular about not giving advice. What drives that for you, if you don't mind sharing?
A respect for the person that I care about who's in front of me, and finding a way to figure out like how I can support them. But it's by invitation only.
Love that, Jeremy. That's a beautiful golden rule, if you will, on communication with other people to be able to find out where that is for them. And I've noticed that on the BDE, you're very generous and open when you share things. So I appreciate that as well. This
Thank
quote
you.
by Pastor Louis Konopa, unsolicited.
Kanapka, yeah.
Thank
It's-
you. I have
That's
watered the
okay.
name.
Kanapka, it's a Polish word.
Yep, linguistics is not my strong suit, but unsolicited advice is always a form of judgment.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something to keep in mind when we're interacting with people, because how often does that well-intentioned advice lead to where Tim's talking about disagreements,
Yep.
and then more of that, we had a fight, so I'm going to go talk to my girlfriend about all the things that he should have known about me and reading my mind, right? Oh, and say, and even that question, right? That was a proven position. Did anybody catch that? My intonation with inflection, looking for somebody to agree with what I just said.
And the interesting thing is how much of that is become very common in our language nowadays. You
Mhm.
hear, right?
Yeah.
Or I know, right? It's very common in language now, and that's a form of proven position.
Mhm. Well, I would really like to transition off of something that Jeremy had added there. Blair, he's talking about respect for the other person and, more effectively supporting without those kinds of the unsolicited advice portions. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what to do. We focused for the last bit on the things that don't work. I'd like to shift us to focus now more on what does work. So could you talk a little bit about changing that behavior and separating people from their behavior?
Absolutely. So when we start separating people from their behavior rather than being their behavior, if people are their behavior, can you perceive that they're going to ever change? And I know I'm using sort of that, I forget the word ever, like ever, never,
It's a
always.
distorter word, the ever,
Distorter word.
always,
Right.
all, nothing
We're
kind of.
bringing that in.
Jackie?
Hey, Jackie. So the disorder word of ever, does that person ever change? We're preconditioning our mind and locking the behavior to become the person. But if the behavior is not the person, then it's no different than my shirt, because I could literally change my shirt, just undo the buttons, take it off, put on a new shirt. Boom. If we view behaviors as though it is an article of clothing, we can change our behavior and try on new ones. So, in a sense, we're going shopping here on the BDE to try on new behaviors. Things that have been tested to work for people. I'll get to you in a second, Jackie. Is your hand up? We can't hear you right now. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So functionally, what we want to do is we want to be able to identify our behavior as separate from ourselves. However, we can't truly change our behavior if we don't have another behavior to replace it with. So that's the problem. And how many times do we make a new behavior a habit? I would say virtually all the time if we're not resourceful. Like, we will create habits that are locked in if we don't find alternative ways. Therefore, we want to go through the evaluation questions in the 3 E's. And the evaluation questions are what worked, what didn't work, and what's one thing I can change. And we start noticing what's working for us, one thing that's some things that are not working for us, but working on changing one thing. Not everything, just one thing, which does two things. It chunks it down to a manageable size of changing one thing, but it also requires that we identify that one thing we want to change. And just the simple act of identifying the thing that we want to change shifts us from a stuck state into a resourceful state. On my call today, working with that CTO, it was amazing because all I wound up doing is giving him that, well, that and a few other chunks, but that primary chunk of information. And for him, that was mind-blowing because he rated the session at 15 out of 10. Like it was a 15 today, because he viewed it as such a different way for him to think, simply because he wasn't looking for resourcefulness, he was looking for a solution. And when you're getting resourceful in mind model method coach training or virtually any of my other methodologies that I've created, it's always looking for three, if at all possible, three ways of potentially resolving a problem. In other words, you're in a resourceful state. So if your first attempt doesn't work, you go to plan B and plan C. And as soon as you've gone to plan B and tried plan A and plan B, plan A didn't work. Now you're on to plan B. I tried to get a plan D because plan A is dead. And so that's how I operate my life. And I found it to be highly effective because I don't ever really feel too stuck. When I am stuck, I recognize that it's circumstances in my life that have created my state, not me. And that's huge. So for the last year, I had my cancer and then radiation, illness, radiation-induced proctitis. And now all of that is slowly going away, and I'm coming back closer to where I was before all of this stuff happened. And what am I putting back into my life? Plan A, plan B, and plan C. And my perception of myself has shifted. Have I actually shifted? Not yet. Nothing has changed functionally, but it is moving towards something that I can perceive, that I can control, that I can perceive, I can influence a change in the direction of where I'm going. And that perception of change is very powerful. It's what people call hope.
Blair, may I jump in on something you said a couple minutes ago related
Yeah.
to separating? Okay. Yeah, that you brought up something to me that I haven't thought about for a while, but it's something I learned when I was learning psychology to teach it and building programs for it. I learned a lot about conditioning.
Yes.
And is anyone here familiar with like B.F. Skinner and Skinner boxes and the work he's done? I
Yep.
see some head nods. Little okay, so I'll fill you in. So basically, this guy he was able to train like pigeons to guide missiles, to play ping pong. He was able to train rats to like climb up a ladder and do a little dance and then like climb back down the ladder, like all this crazy stuff that you would think that you'd be able to train these animals to do. And the way that he would do it is he would set up some situation where it was possible for them to take the action that he would want them to take. So if it was a pigeon that he wanted to peck on a certain spot on the wall, he would just put that spot on the wall and just wait and just watch. And eventually the pigeon would just randomly stumble into pecking that spot on the wall. But he would observe them so carefully and just wait for that moment. And the second they did it, he'd jump in with like a food pellet or something and reinforce that behavior that they did completely accidentally, completely randomly. But because he was watching so carefully and paying attention and was able to see when they did that behavior, he was able to reward it just the right time and increase the likelihood that it happened. Just painstakingly do this over time. And so then he would build these more sophisticated behaviors. And the reason that came to my mind, Blair, you mentioned like separating people from their behaviors. And that
Yes.
actually brought to mind like that idea of attaboys for me too. It's like if you want to be able to influence somebody to increase a behavior that is effective, maybe it's in your relationship or even do it for yourself. Like one, you have to pay attention and you have to also like recognize that behaviors can go up or down. And whether they go up or down is largely going to be based on what happens immediately after they perform that behavior. So if someone that you're in a relationship with does something that you like and that you'd like them to do more of, like pay attention to that. Maybe they just do it randomly one time, but if you just think, oh, well, that's just who they are, or maybe that was just a random fluke, and you don't jump on that and say, hey, I saw that and that was awesome. Like, thank you, or I really appreciate that. You don't jump in there in that moment. Like, that's a huge opportunity to make that behavior happen more and more and more. And you can do that for yourself too. That's something like the safety versus comfort for me actually really helped me to do that. Um, because I realized I didn't do that for myself for the longest time because I was so wrapped up in my own stress and anxiety. Like I was too distracted to be able to actually pay attention to what I was doing effectively or what other people were doing effectively. So just thought I'd share that. I've kind of finally made that connection between those psychological things I learned, and how it's actually practical in day-to-day life.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to build on that a little bit because that is more frequently done in relationships where we reinforce negatively what we don't want by criticism,
Mhm.
by the fact that we get scared, by the fact that you don't like what somebody is doing and you comment every time they do something you don't like. Well, unfortunately, what I've noticed in group work is that if there is no intervention to work towards a positive, something that you do want, what you get frequently is more of the negative. Even with negative reinforcement, you can get more of the negative, or worse, you can get people or animals, in that case, it's another experiment of giving strong negative reinforcement when they do stuff that you don't want them to do. You shock them electrically, that whole thing. Or you could do something more along the lines of what's referred to as the Pike syndrome. They put a bunch of minnows in a aquarium in a bell jar, glass, which I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you put a glass in water, it disappears because the refractive index of the glass and water is exactly the same. So it just disappears visually. You can't tell the difference. And then they put in a pike on the outside of the bell jar, and the pike is hungry and it runs at the minnows and it fires at the minnows, but it keeps on running into the jar. So the minnows, initially try to swim away, but run into the far side of the bell jar when the pike is attacking, but they can't get out. But they learned that nobody got eaten because the pike never got in. So over time, they just keep on swimming around when the pike is trying to attack. And even worse is the pike stops attacking at some point. he gives up. They take the bell jar out, and this starving, very hungry fish does not attack and eat its prey. It dies. And that's referred to as the Pike syndrome, where people give up. They quit
I'd
trying.
like to interrupt for a moment and shift us back. These are the positive things, and the Pike syndrome makes me want to cry. So
Okay.
I want us to shift back into the things that do work and away from the things that don't. Brent, I
Oh,
want to
I was,
ask you, may I ask you a
yeah.
question? Or do you have something to say?
Oh, I had something to say real quick before you
Sure.
jump in there. Something I was just when Blair was explaining that, like the reinforcing the strong negative, like a strong or negative reinforcement, it's
Mhm.
focusing on that behavior and keeping that in the forefront of the mind without having a replacement behavior, even though
Bingo.
you don't want it.
That's
You're
where I was
focusing on
going.
that
Well
piece. It
done,
says
Brent.
if what you don't want is you're like focusing on what you don't want, you get more of that because you're focusing on that.
Yes.
Not what you want. It's what you
Well
don't
done.
want. Same
And
thing.
somebody
Yeah,
give him some of those little floaties. That was really good.
thank you.
So that was really excellent. Thank you, Jane. Floaties for you, Brent.
Can
Really
we just
well
make a
done.
point that that's the example of the example happening right now? Thank you very
Yep.
much.
Exactly.
Now Jeremy gets some.
Mhm.
Yes. So now Jeremy gets some, and look at how it just
Yep.
cascades. It's all wonderful.
What was your
Anyway,
question?
what do you, I was going to ask you, I had a different question in mind, but this sort of cascading positivity here. How do you feel when you receive these kinds of positive things from others? What do you feel inside?
Who are you asking?
Yeah.
Brent,
Yes.
Brent and I are
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. I would say just based off like right now, it was like a sense of accomplishment, almost like something was
Yeah,
effective, understood, like joy, excitement,
yeah. Joy
some
and
I
excitement.
say or like a love, like people are, you know.
So if someone is depositing into you with this
Mhm.
type of information or affirmation, confirmation, whatever word you want to use, if they happen to stumble into an ineffective communication process with you, what is your response to them if they have already made so many deposits into your bank in a positive way? Do you have potentially more threshold for someone
Yeah.
else to make an error if they have taken the time to deposit into you?
Yeah, yeah. That's I was leaning towards more of a like a leeway. You have more of a buffer zone type of thing. There's more, say a little bit like a forgiveness zone, piece there. You're okay with it. You're a
Yeah.
more of allowance, like just like you were explaining, but I just a little bit different names and labels to it.
I was attempting to make a question out of it, and I was not
Yeah.
successful with that. But
But yeah,
um,
that's and at the same thing, okay, so if you add to that, then it's more likely to reciprocate that those behaviors
mhm,
if that was the case. And if it's ineffective, to be more open to be effective communication on that as being ineffective. And, use effective communication to point out what was ineffective.
mhm.
And
So
so
you referred to it as a buffer zone.
yeah.
I like to think of it as a bank account,
Okay.
and we make deposits into one another's accounts, and periodically somebody will make a withdrawal.
Mm.
But if there's more in the bank than they're withdrawing, the relationship still works. When the bank account becomes overdrawn because of ineffective communication, the relationship fails. So part of the end result or the desired result of effective communication is the building of relationships. We build a relationship with ourselves and we build relationships with others that way. But Colin,
You,
oh,
Patty,
yes, sir.
do you care if I speak to this for just a minute?
I do not care at all, Tim. I'd love to hear what you
Give
have to say.
well, so I'd like to share, and I'm going to be a little vulnerable here. I love what you just shared, Patty, because that really hit home for me. Um, I come from a little bit of history here. I come from a home that was not effective communication. Come from a home that was very talked down, and there was not a lot of deposits that were made into that bank account. In fact, it was constantly over withdrawn. And I had a lot of growing up, I had a lot of negative I had no self-confidence, a lot of negative self-talk. Um, when attaboys, people give praise, I find, and I love what you shared, Brent, that it brings that joy, it's uplifting, it makes that deposit. I'll fully admit to this day when somebody gives me an attaboy, when somebody, gives me a compliment, I struggle to take that in. It is something that is very uncomfortable for me. And I have a hard time accepting it and smiling and feeling that deposit, if you will, because I'm so used to being overdrawn in my bank account. Um, my life really started turning around when I met my wife. My wife comes and I speak to this and she can speak to her own historical, but from what I've seen personally is she comes from a very loving home, one that built their children up, self-confidence, was constantly pouring into their bank account. And so when I met her, she has constantly poured into my bank account, which has then increased my self-confidence. It's built me up over the years. And a lot of the accomplishments that I've been able to do over these last few years has been largely because of my wonderful wife. Um, and so just a real world example of what Patty's speaking to, when we're constantly pouring into others, it really does build them up. It really does help. And there is a major difference between somebody who has been a part of effective communication and somebody who has not had effective communication their whole life. It does really make a big difference. So anyway, it really touched me when you were sharing that, Patty. That really hit home for me, and I wanted to share that because I felt it.
Thank you. I want to highlight one of the things that you said is that even coming from a place of communication bankruptcy, if you will, that bank account was still there to pour into. So when Becky, it wasn't an irretrievable situation. And so with Becky's behaviors and I know you well enough to know that you are active in your process of learning, growing, and changing. That's not a passive thing for you. So that again speaks to Blair's, you can change your shirt.
Yes.
You are not locked in to where you came from as being who you are. So well done, Tim. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that.
The other interesting thing with that and with the mind models and being able to change your shirt is I was not aware back then. I didn't know that I could even change my shirt. Let's put it that way. I didn't know that there was even something amiss. It was just, it was a habit. It was something normal. And so one of the things that was so powerful about going through Mind Model Coach and being able to meet Blair and to learn these mind models is I was then aware of what was even going on. And I was able to name and label and identify what was going on and be able to, because you first have to identify before you can even start to make that process of moving forward and change those behaviors so that you can create a new habit, create change.
Mhm.
So that was powerful, just being able to name and label and to identify what was going on, and put a whole process to what was already put in play by what my wife was doing. So it was powerful.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it definitely is. It speaks to a mind model, self-confidence versus confidence. And for Jeremy, I'd really like if that the contrasting definitions from a mind model perspective, if we could have that dropped into the chat someplace. But the Colin, would you like to speak a little bit to self-confidence versus confidence? There you go. And what that difference has meant to you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is one that's been very front of mind for me over the last several months. Um, there's your counter, Jeremy. Do you want to you want to start that going? I was actually thinking of that recently too. Yeah, so confidence, others, identification of your effective use of skills, attitudes, and behaviors. Self-confidence, self-identification of your effective use of skills, attitudes, and behaviors. For me, the way that this has manifested in the past several months is I knew intellectually that I was effective, but if you'd asked me, I was effective in coaching, for example. But if you asked me, well, how do you know that you're effective in coaching? What I would have told you is, well, I have a lot of good reviews from people. I have video testimonials of people saying that I was helpful to them. Um, and I've had people tell me that, I was a great coach. I was really helpful to them. That's how I would have responded probably a few months ago. Um, yeah, probably as recently as like 3 months ago. And it took Blair kind of pointing it out to me specifically. He told me like confidence versus self-confidence. I never really heard that distinction before, but I didn't realize I operated from a place of confidence. All of that was based on what other people said about me. Uh, there was very little of my own identification of, oh, this is a specific thing that I do well. And here's my data to support that. Here's the evidence of that working. Here's how it works. Here's when it works. I couldn't do that. And naming and
Colin, may
labeling.
I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
How did living in a place of confidence versus self-confidence impact the social anxiety that you shared in the
Ooh,
past?
tying in tying in my intro from last couple weeks.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize it when I was in it. I realized it looking backwards, but I entered situations hoping that whatever magic I had done in the past would happen again. It was like rolling dice. I'd show up to a new coaching consultation and I wasn't confident that I would close sales, for example. I was like, I've closed a lot of sales in the past. I hope it happens again this time. I hope I haven't lost the secret with the magic, whatever I was doing that happened to work on all those. I hope it works this time. Right. And so it was very, yeah, there was like this anxiety around it because it felt like this mysterious force that may or may not just show up. And I didn't feel like I had ownership of that. It was just a thing that happened to occur on a more than chance basis.
Thank
But out
you.
Does
of
that
your
answer your
control,
question?
correct?
What's
Out of
that?
your was did it feel like it was out of your control?
It felt like luck. Yeah, it felt
Yeah,
lucky.
it's just luck. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
And actually
we're,
I've
we're lucky.
I've been told as many, many times to kind of go to Tim's point of like the environments we're raised in and how they influence us. I was told many times growing up that I was very lucky. And that, man, when I play board games, when I, be playing a sport. So I'm like, you just get so lucky sometimes. There's no way you could make that shot again in 100 years. Like it just, and so I had that reinforced to me too. And I think I really did internalize that. I'm just lucky. Things work out because I'm lucky. It's not because of things that I've learned that I do well.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Interesting. Well, we're going to do something a little different at the end here. Becky's going to start with our outro and Blair's going to do our wrap up. So, Becky, if you could do that and then pass it to Blair.
Yes, absolutely. So you guys, we love it when we gather together on Tuesday nights and get to learn and experience the mind models together and the great wealth of knowledge and practical use that they can provide to us. So again, please remember to join us on Tuesdays for mind model or excuse me, the Blair Dunkley experience where we discuss mind models again Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Mountain. That is 9 p.m. Eastern. If you guys are on YouTube, please make sure you comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And as a reminder, Blair has created an awesome opportunity for you to get more in-depth information on the mind models through his study guide. And again, that is everything that's historical and moving forward. If that's something that you feel you could benefit from and have an enhancement to your learning of mind models and real world application in your life, please make sure that you go to blairdunkley.com/BD Insider Notes. It's $25 a month or $300 a year. And we look forward to seeing you again in the new year. And with that, Mr. Blair, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a very excellent experience tonight. So yes. Okay, with that, guys, it's amazing. I am impressed and thankful and have a ton of gratitude for all of you showing up. And those of you on YouTube that are showing up as well and looking at this, whenever you do find us, please consider joining us here on the Blair Dunkley Experience. There will be a Zoom link for you to click on to join and come on every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Mountain, and 8 p.m. Central Time, or whatever time zone you're in. Now, with that, I would like to go through and find out from you guys where you're at. And I'd also like to give you practice a behavior called a PSR, Planned Spontaneous Recognition. As my Christmas gift to each of you, I would like to share with you my appreciation of you here. So, do you mind, Shannon, if I start with you tonight? Okay. Super. I read your lips. So, but you said no, you don't mind. Okay, so how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Good. You know what, Shannon? I so much appreciate your courage on showing up here. Like, it's not necessarily an easy thing for you to do with all the stuff that you're going through in your life. But showing up here and listening and taking notes and growing and applying. And most nights we have a normal wrap up where we give what our takeaways for the night. Well, now it's my opportunity for the year to tell you how valuable your contributions have been. And when we were Becky, Tim, Colin, and Patty and I were working through putting the notes together for this one, your name came up. And what came up for this was how impressive your summaries have been and how impactful they are. And you can see Jackie nodding her head big time, throwing you a thumbs up and everything else. You are a classy lady that gives great input and it is super appreciated that you're here. Thank you so much for being part of this experience. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. That
There's
means
no-
that means so much. It's a warm hug over a Zoom.
Yeah, it is. I try to make it that way because you deserve it. Um, Jeremy, would you mind if I shared my perceptions and with you now?
That'd be great. Thank you.
You, sir, are, I think it's been said here before, but I'll say it again, a breath of fresh air, a new perspective, a new view of the mind models from fresh eyes who force us to define, state, announce the mind models, to state them more clearly so that you can learn them from scratch. And the more that you've gotten involved and been here over the last, what, 6 to 8 weeks or so, is that correct? Yeah. You've come a long way in a very short time. Like, I totally, you're definitely a part of this group, like full on, full-fledged member. That's it. Okay. Like, hands down. Continue to ask your questions, continue your curiosity. You are really coming across with massive curiosity and engagement here, and it is appreciated, obviously, by most other people, if not everybody else here, because of all of the little love signs, hearts, strong muscles, whatever that are being thrown out at you. Like, you are getting it, and it's great to see, and so much of that is appreciated. Your heart is one of kindness, your connectedness to seek clarity, not divisiveness, and your caution on making sure that you own your own stuff, even when you're clarifying what somebody else did that may not be clear and could be interpreted as not, like, as an attack. You make sure that it's not, and you make sure that it is clarity. And so far, without exception, it's been received as kindness and learning.
Yeah.
And I go, like, that is so, so clear. I would like you to relax, because a couple of times you have stated repeatedly, well, twice that I can recall, that you don't want it to go in this negative view situation. Do you want it to be viewed as positive? I go, I don't know if you need to do that, because my expectation of everybody else and your behavioral delivery has been only done with graciousness, clarity, and seeking information honestly with an open heart, not with one that's willing to attack. You do want to state when you're confused, but you own your confusion. You own your whatever it is, whatever feeling you're feeling, you own it. So it's very easy to, I was going to say, cut you some slack, but you don't need slack, because it is clear what you're doing. You're creating a pathway forward for yourself to learn. And by doing that, I've learned from you. So thank you. Really appreciate you being here, Jeremy. Okay. Any comments, Jeremy?
I've really come to love when people ask me for my input. I was thinking about how Tim spoke to something I've heard many people say in my life about receiving positive compliments or strokes or feedback. And I was just thinking about doing that as well as I could. And I have tears in my eyes. And I really want to lean into, like, improving my ability and helping other people improve their ability to receive. And that's just something that like I just felt like that was the strongest shower of appreciation and adulation that I could ever remember having. And I'm gonna go back to the YouTube and listen to it again tomorrow.
Good.
Thank
I'm
you.
so glad that that's there for you. You're very kind and considerate in creating and sharing the information. It's so generous. Thank you. Okay, with that, Jane, would you mind if I did you next? Okay, that I'll take that as a yes. Your mic is open, so you know, you've been here the majority of the year and for years, and it's been you were definitely missed when you weren't here and going through whatever you were going through. Was it another move or something? I forget exactly what that was. Yeah.
Depends on the year.
Yeah, okay. Fair ball. Fair ball. But you're always, always welcome. You definitely have a home here. You're definitely welcome. It's so wonderful to have you part of this. Your perspective, your view adds color, adds a different perspective, and it's appreciated. And your application and stories of application of the mind models in your life and with your family members that know of and use the mind models and how you do that, it's deeply appreciated by me. It's like the part of you share what you've learned, and it has infected members of your family, and they use this. And it's wonderful to see that positive infection grow. And I thank you so much for being here.
You are quite welcome, and thank you. I feel welcomed here.
I hope you, like personally, I hope you feel loved here, because that's what I feel when I see you. It's like just appreciation for you showing up. Thank you. Okay. Brent, you're up. May I share with you? I
Yes.
feel you have an anchor position in here every week. If you don't show up, we don't start. Like, I mean, that's just the way it works here. It's so funny. It's just like, it's like this. It's perfect timing. You show up, we get started. That's it. You're the guy that starts it, but you've been here virtually from the beginning, and maybe a few months, a few weeks actually off from the beginning. But you were here, and it's an amazing thing for me to see the growth when I think back of where you were, 5 or so years ago when I started this whole thing, 325 plus or minus a few weeks ago. So that's over 5 years, I believe. And you've been here that long. Yeah, it's been amazing. And seeing you and your growth. Wow, it's impressive. It's strange in one sense and impressive in another.
Thank you. Yeah,
Speaking of, go
back
ahead.
at the time, it does seem a bit strange on how long ago it was and how fast it does go.
Yeah.
I was
And
just looking at my notebook that I have, and I'm on the last page, and I look back, I'm like, it ended at the year, and I look back, I'm like, wow, each page, I keep it straight, but it's a year and a half in the notebook. I'm like, I
wow.
remember, with the new notebook and everything, I remember that, and then I look back and I'm like, man, that's quite some time.
Yeah. And so much learning that you've applied and you're now sharing with others, on the BDE. It is so, so appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to jump to Jackie now. May I share? No, unfortunately, I can't hear you. Sorry. but you can obviously hear me. And yes, there it goes. So unlike others here, we go way, way back. And not just a few years. This is 3 decades. I was gonna go, 2 decades and just keep, well, whatever. No, you're right. It truly is. I did the math as you were doing this, and I was trying to be generous and cut it back down, but no, I'm sorry. You're right. It is technically 3+ decades in what we were doing. So, you came in when I was doing operant effectual counseling, live and in person in British Columbia. I would travel out from Edmonton to BC. And you were out here, were you not, for some of the coach training that we did, Jackie? Yes, I thought so. And then you were out there. We went out there, and with what was then Results Now and is now Rewiring the Mind, and all the mind models that we did, and you took catalytic or operant effectual counseling, and then mind model method coach training, and applied all of that to yourself, and also had gone through life skills coach training, and come back for OEC. You came back for OEC 14 times, I recall. It was crazy. Operant effectual counseling, you could audit 14 times. And I asked you one time, how come you came back? And you shared with me, every time I come here, Blair, even though you're saying and teaching the same skills and behaviors, there's always a different way to take a look and apply this stuff. And when everybody comes in and you see it and hear it differently every single time, that just demonstrates the amount of intentionality you have and desire to view yourself and others the way they are, and to be there and to share this with others. So thank you. You have talked about being an ambassador for things, and I appreciate you as an ambassador for this and sharing this with others and bringing other people in from time to time. It's been huge. So I thank you so very, very much. It's amazing. Yeah. She's giving kisses and hugs to everybody, if you didn't notice. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I know that whole thing. Yep. Okay. With that, then Colin. So may I do you next?
I'm here. I'm open. Hit me.
Thank you. Yep. What was that? I'm here. I'm open. Hit me. Was that
Yep.
what you said? Oh,
That's what I said.
okay. I'll hit you with the good stuff. In a relatively short period of time, you're focusing in on the mind models, applying them with a great deal of rigor. In other words, you have a lot of, dare I say, academic and some experiential knowledge of this, but a lot of the academic smarts. You're a very smart young man. I really like how you think things through with a lot of heartfelt engagement and care and concern. And one of the things, the biggest gains I've seen you have with yourself is the growth in you and the growth in your own ability to identify yourself having grown. And that's been huge. and highly effective. You're getting stronger and more effective in your ability to see yourself clearly. As you were talking about self-confidence is others identifying confidence is others identifying your effective use of skills, attitudes, and behaviors. But self-confidence is you self-identifying your own effective use of skills, attitudes, and behaviors. You being able to do that and now do it from a position of externally verifiable, where you can look at yourself in a semi-disassociated state as though somebody else was seeing you, and you know you're doing it effectively. And it's so amazing to see in less than a year, your self-doubt go way down. Like way down. And you're applying and proving to yourself that you know. It's not up for debate. So people can't take it away, can't challenge that, because you know what you know. You've experienced it. That's sort of the purpose for this thing called the Blair Dunkley experience. It's got my name on it only because not only, but because I created these mind models, or at least the vast majority of this information is based on the research that I did. And I share other top quality stuff. And what you've done with me is repeatedly given me other researchers' ability to confirm what I'm doing is effective, or state this is more effective than what you've seen elsewhere, because of your own personal life experience. I can't tell you how valuable that has been for me. Thank you. You've brought a lot here. Just a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Tim, may I share with you next?
Yes.
Thank you. You are an amazing man, and I almost want to say a bit of an enigma. What you shared tonight is where you've come from in terms of having that bank of positives being lower, or an empty piggy bank, or a deficit in account that you shared. But please remember to put the plug in the bottom of the piggy bank to keep the positives in. Don't let them trickle out the bottom, please. And on the days that it's in there, and the moments that you share from that point of internal personal strength, through the tragedy that you've gone through, not just with your kids, but prior, and it's the conflict and the difficulty, the difficult life that you shared today about, it's prepared you to accept care and concern. And your ability to generate, to share, to show, to offer your story to others and help them see their strengths, their goodness, their light, and go through their struggle is huge. It's a big thing. It's not quite as consistent as I would like, or probably you would like yet, but gosh, you're good. You're definitely worth investing in and making things happen. It is so brilliant when you're on. You are an amazing man at that moment. It's just totally agreed. I mean, obviously other people are sending you thumbs up and hugs and other things, stars and stuff. So it's all there. So they're seeing it too. Becky.
Thank you, Blair.
You're very welcome, Tim. So Becky, you have a lot of grace, class, and dignity. You have put yourself together very well, and you share yourself with others so effectively. Yep, and your husband loves you to bits. So, and I get that. And you love him too. I mean, honest to God, the looks that you have given him on these shows have been amazing. You look at him when he's on, it's like a loudspeaker in my head going, "That's my man." Like you just look like a proud wife. And that's huge. I love the fact that you see things the way you do with a level of what I'm going to refer to as incremental precision. Things need to fit together for you, and they go chunk, 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 chunk. But sometimes they go clunk, and that's where you dive in to the weeds, questioning, checking things out, figuring it out. So it can go clunk or chunk, 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 not no clunk anymore. And you help others chunk it down so things fit for them as well, with explanation, but mostly with the care and concern that you're sharing. That sharing of care and concern through your voice, through your actions, through your efforts are there. I thank you so much for being part of the BDE and coming in and doing this. You and Tim make a wonderful pair. And separately, I take you each on your own merits, but together, you actually demonstrate the relationship part of the BDE as well. So thank you for that as well.
Thank
It's
you,
huge.
Blair.
You're very, very well. And now for Patty. Wow. When I go back to where I first saw you to where you are now, it's very mind-blowing to me. You know what? People have no idea how far you've come in where you were with your stuff and where you are now. And you've stated this quite often on here, that you're going through more stuff now than you did back then when you were handling depression. The resilience that you've found, the ability to chunk things down, to make them into pieces that are individually manageable. And yeah, sometimes a little harried from things like animals that you're taking care of, a child that you're taking, a grandson that you're taking care of, and family members, and then clients, and everything else that's going on in your life, everything else. And just juggling it and letting it be okay. And that's been such a huge shift that I've seen. Self-acceptance of where you're at and being gracious to yourself is now starting to impact everybody else around you. And this BDE, you give it a tone of gracious class. Yeah, it is huge. It's really, really appreciated from me. So yeah, you get those, but probably as important, you get these as well. You are definitely up there and getting your gold stars with a lot of love from me.
Thank you so much.
I would like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for being here, for being you, and creating an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other
Mhm.
and to continue on the mind models in your own lives, in your own ways, and move them to the next level of where you're going, to share them with others. And please continue to invite people to the BDE. It would be huge. I just want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and or best of the season, whatever is appropriate for you, and a very, very happy and prosperous new year. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all.
Yeah.
You all make us what we are. So thank you so very much.
Absolutely. It's appreciated. Well, with that, there's nothing else that needs to be said. I think we can wrap this up for a year end. And just with I really love being here on Tuesday nights. It has been an anchor for me in tough times and a wonderful place to be in the good times.
Mhm.
So I've gone through a lot of health challenges this year. But you know what? You guys have made it and helped me through just by being here and seeing what you guys have gotten and come across and continue to give. So thank you.
And thank you,
Anyway,
Blair. I
you're
want to
very
end there with a massive thank you for, and I think that I can speak for all of us on this call for to a degree, your willingness to lean in and get curious and provide access for us to tools and skills that we can use will be forever remembered and has forever changed each one of us in our own unique way and being able to be more effective in our lives. So thank you for that and for providing this opportunity for us.
It's literally been my honor. It really is. Thank you.
All right, you guys, have a wonderful rest of your evening wherever you're tuning in from. We're looking forward to seeing you in the new year. Mark your calendars. We'll be back on the 7th and have a wonderful holiday, and we will see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Take
Bye.
care. See you
Bye.
next year.
See you
See you
next year.
next year.
Yep. Bye for now.